Ladies and gentlemen, drivers, gig workers, and everyone in between, welcome to This Week in Rideshare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Hoffa. It is Friday, January 3rd, and this week the IRS cracks down on gig work, self-driving is here, and Lyft sues San Francisco. Legal Rideshare breaks it down. And from Legal Rideshare, I'm joined by the co-founder and lead attorney, Brian Greening, and special guest, Torsten, better known as the Rideshare Professor. Gentlemen, happy Friday. Great to see you both.
Thank you. Happy New Year, gentlemen.
Yeah, Torsten, thanks so much for coming on. It's awesome to have you here.
Yeah, Torsten, it has been a minute. You're obviously a rock star in the gig and rideshare world. You obviously, we cross paths so much, and we haven't for quite a long time, so it's great to have you back on the show and chiming in on the latest news.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the invite, and to all listeners and subscribers. As you've heard me say many times before, you always follow the best of the best. So make sure you follow their YouTube channel, the Legal Rideshare channel. Many drivers have received excellent help over the years. And then the wonderful podcast where they cover the latest and greatest. So again, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And with that being said, we're gonna jump right into it with the first story here. The IRS is making it clear that it is cracking down on gig work. So this is from Gizmodo, and they reported, quote, "In a sign that the IRS could be cracking down on gig workers, the agency has received authorization from a federal court to gather information from Just Answer LLC about any U.S. taxpayers who receive compensation through the platform. In November, the IRS issued new guidance to gig work platforms, instructing them to report information to the agency about taxpayers who earned more than $5,000 in 2024, more than $2,500 in 2025, and more than $600 in 2026 and beyond. Previously, gig platforms only had to report information to the IRS for workers who earned more than $20,000 and completed at least about 200 transactions. The new thresholds are designed to make it harder for gig workers to avoid paying taxes on their income." So, Brian, I'm going to toss this to you first. I know there's a lot of jargon here, but can you kind of wrap up what is happening and why IRS is kind of ramping up these requirements?
Yeah, sure. So in the past, gig work has been very unregulated in a lot of ways. It's been easier for gig companies and gig workers to evade paying taxes for a variety of reasons. Part of that is because of the system that's in place that's new. The IRS has not had to deal with this kind of hybrid worker that falls under an independent contractor status, is getting paid by various different providers, is actually controlled a lot by the entity that they work for. And at this point, the IRS is just playing catch up. So before, the gig companies would only have to report the highest earners from the gig workers. And those people would, the IRS would look at them and want to get paid accordingly. Now the IRS is saying, no, anybody that makes a certain threshold with, not that much money, a couple $100s, needs to be reported to the IRS so that we can investigate and see what money we, Uncle Sam, are owed by this worker. That will also open up the door to perhaps finding out about other companies that they're working for. The IRS might hear, say, from Uber that the driver made $500 and then say, okay, driver, were you also working for Lyft? Were you also working for Postmates? And they'll want to collect what they can based on that driver's income. So there's a couple things here that just important to point out. One, it looks like drivers are going to be held more accountable for their earnings. And two, it looks like the federal government is starting to shift its thinking on gig work and want to do a better job of regulating it. This may be the first step, and we may down the line see other agencies try to make changes as it relates to gig workers, perhaps creating a new employment status, perhaps better defining the benefits that they're entitled to and how gig companies need to treat them. So this is a story to watch, but it certainly is the first step.
Yeah, and Torsten, I want to just tap you for a second here, because I think you do a really fantastic job of being on the threshold of, there's no better way to say it, I think, than kind of wake up call. I think you do a really good job of letting gig workers, drivers, and everyone else know when there are changes to things like what the IRS is doing or payment structures or things to look out on the apps. So I feel like
Yeah.
this is something you'll probably talk about in the future, I'm sure.
I mean, the problem is that a lot of drivers don't take this serious, right? A lot of them are just like in dreamland, chase trip after trip, and don't treat this as a business. This is a business. If you're not staying on top of the numbers, it'll quickly catch up, and you'll be in a large hole. I've seen it over and over and over again. So, two things are certain: death and taxes. You cannot ignore that second one, the taxes. The numbers that you ran, 20,000 in the past, over 20,000. A lot of people were definitely below that and thought, okay, I don't have to report anything. 2024, $5,000. And just look at the trend here. 2025, this year, we're in 2025, over $2,500. You easily reach $2,500. I mean, that's a hand, that's 1.5, 2, 3 weeks of work, and you're already over that threshold. So at 2025, that sounds like they're really clamping down. And then even in 2026, it goes down to 600. So you see the trend here. And they know that there are millions and millions of gig workers there. They know that they can access some real money. And we as drivers cannot ignore that. Now, a lot of drivers do a combination of Uber and Lyft, or a combination of Uber and Lyft and private trips. Some people might be 1099s, W-2s, and have an LLC. I mean, there's a whole array of scenarios, but you can't circumvent, no matter what you're doing, whether you're doing private trips and setting yourself up as an LLC, you'll be running that as a business. Whether you're doing, the Uber or Lyft, you'll each get your reports at the end of the year. You have to address them individually. If you're smart enough to do that on TurboTax or any one of those great software systems, great. Otherwise, you go out there and, I always say, you get yourself a good attorney like LegalRideshare, or you get yourself a good accountant out there. So pay attention to this. Don't ignore this. This can come back and bite you horribly. Be prepared.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it best. You got to stay on top of this. This is no joke. Obviously, it's IRS, so it's certainly no joke. And it just like you said, we're seeing the trend. This is not going away. Bryant, you mentioned it. This may open the door for other agencies. So it's here. It's here. It's happening. So make sure you're aware of what's going on.
Yeah, and let me just say one more
Sure.
sentence. So this is a time to reiterate that you need to be keeping track of your expenses, because a lot of your income can be deducted or a lot of your expenses can be deducted from your income, which can have a great effect on how much you owe in taxes. So if you haven't been keeping track of things like gas, wear and tear, anything that you're putting into this business, because, we're not kidding here. This is your business. You got to treat it like one. If you track it and you give it to your accountant, it's really going to reduce your tax liability. So now's the time to start doing that.
Yeah,
Exactly. That's good.
100%. We're going to move on to the second story here. 2024 proved that self-driving is here, but the big question we all have, especially at Legal Rideshare, is it safe? And this is from CNET, and they reported, quote, Waymo plans to expand to Atlanta and Austin, Texas through a partnership with Uber and launch its first international testing in Tokyo. Zoox aims to open up to public riders starting in Las Vegas, and another startup called Averide, which also has partnered with Uber to deploy its autonomous vehicles and delivery robots, hopes to launch a robo-taxi service in Dallas by 2025. Aside from the regulatory hurdles, there's also the considerable challenge of convincing the public that self-driving cars are safe. That's why practically every piece of communication from robotaxi companies touts the safety of their prospective vehicles and technology, especially in comparison to human drivers. Now, the data here is interesting. This is from a Waymo data hub published in September. States that after driving over 22 million miles, its self-driving tech was involved in 73% fewer injury-causing crashes and 48% fewer police-reported crashes compared to human drivers. So, Brian, obviously I want to have you weigh on this first. We've talked about this a lot recently. This data is coming out saying it's safer, but we're also seeing these kind of really radical stories where these vehicles are just getting stuck or not stopping. And I just want to hear your take on it.
Yeah, the robotaxis are here. We've been talking about it for years and saying it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Well, they're now on the streets, and we're seeing them expand city by city. And frankly, they're going to be in your city before you know it if they're not there already. I like that they're keeping data. I think that it's important that we understand exactly what sorts of, crash and accident situations are happening with these cars. I think it's too early, though, to say that they are safer than human drivers. 22 million miles sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, where we have, how many millions of miles do they test vehicles that are driven by humans to test their safety? It's countless. So I just say that because 22 million miles doesn't tell us that these vehicles are safe and ready to be deployed on every city street in every situation. Are they ready to stop on a dime when a kid runs out in the street? Are they prepared when there's an emergency siren behind them to do what they need to do to, curb and let that emergency vehicle go by? There's just all these different variables that humans have been trained for, that now have instincts for, that the computers, I'm just not certain are capable of doing yet. So I am overall, I think the technology is really cool. I think that it is our future. I believe that most of our rides in however many years are going to be through autonomous vehicles. But I'm concerned that we're jumping the gun and we're doing a lot too quickly without having it fully tested and fully assured that we're ready to do it.
Yeah, and the data that they're showing, which is impressive, and like you said, it is kind of early because there's not that many vehicles on the road yet. What happens when there starts to be tens of thousands of these things on the road? And Torts, I'm curious if you've driven a Waymo yet, or also curious what the rideshare community is saying about these things. Is there kind of hope that we can turn this into a business, our own LLC for like the Teslas, or is there concern they're going to lose their jobs? I'm curious what you're hearing.
It's a fascinating topic, and as Brian said, it's here. It's on our doorsteps, right? And have I driven in one? Yes, just once. I ordered it through the app. I did it in LA. They are in San Francisco streets. They are in LA. They are in Phoenix. Early next year, Austin and Atlanta, and there's no stopping. So we need to stop pretending that it's 5 or 10 years away. It's not. It's right here now. Competition is fierce with Robotaxi, Elon Musk, trying to get certain things through in 2025. Jeff Bezos with Zoox might be even making a move on Lyft, so that they can plug in their Zoox AVs into the platform. I think that's going down in 2025. Waymo's definitely leading the pack. They've done 22 million miles, but again, 22 million miles, as Brian says, it's nothing in the scheme of things. The data, it looks fairly impressive, that humans are in fact organizing, are cause for more accidents and deaths on the road. I could believe the data, but the bottom line is we're not stopping this. And if drivers don't embrace this and find a way forward, they'll be left behind. So the one cool thing is that it's sort of like splitting in different directions now. Uber's trying to form all these alliances, trying to get on board as many of these AV companies as possible, sort of plug and play. Lyft, again, I'm repeating myself, but I think they already they have their partner, which is Zoox. So that's going to play out there in the near future. And then drivers and look at new little rideshare startups. Look at some of the co-ops. One of the co-ops that I consult for, they have built this into their model. If you're a co-op owner or member, you can later down the line actually become a part owner of these vehicles. So drivers are going to be phased out. It's already cutting into their earnings quite substantially in LA. I mean, they're clocking hundreds and thousands of trips here each month. So the drivers are already feeling the pinch that these cars are taking away a lot of their money. We're not going to stop this movement. I think we just have to figure out as drivers, how do we intelligently become part of it and embrace it? My private clients that pay top dollars to have the safety, the flexibility of, going to a restaurant, then to a concert, etc. They said, they're absolutely not interested in these driverless cars. So I think at least my future as far as a private driver is secure. But rideshare drivers need to start planning ahead.
Yeah, that actually brings up a really good point that you had just said about your private clients. We did a story about self-driving cars a couple of weeks ago, Brian. I don't know if you remember this, but while the car, they're saying the cars are safer, the cars are actually at the moment more expensive, and it was like 30 to 40% longer per trip.
Yeah.
So you're not getting the benefits yet of a human driver, other than, okay, there's not a person in it, I can sit in the back. But Brian, you had again brought up about the concerns of just injury and glitches, and then also the money and time. So yeah, you can't get left behind, but also I think, Brian, you had said really well, we can't push this so fast that it becomes an explosion of chaos, which happens a lot in these sort of disruptive technologies.
Agreed.
So yeah, we'll head on to our final story, which is an interesting one here, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think about it. But Lyft is suing San Francisco due to $100 million into what they're calling overcharges. And this is from the TechCrunch, and they reported, quote, Lyft is suing the city of San Francisco, claiming the city unfairly charged the ride-hailing company over $100 million in taxes. Bloomberg reported this. The lawsuit alleges that over the course of 5 years, San Francisco unfairly labeled money earned by Lyft drivers as company revenue. In the complaint, Lyft maintains that its drivers are customers, not employees. Accordingly, Lyft recognizes revenue from rideshare as being comprised of fees paid to Lyft by drivers, not charged paid by riders to drivers. This is what the complaint reads. The lawsuit is just the latest chapter in a years-long debate over how gig economy apps should classify drivers. So obviously the argument here, guys, is they're saying, which sounded a lot like what Uber had said before, their drivers are customers, not employees, and they deserve money back. So Brian, I want to hear your thoughts on this first.
Yeah, well, it's not surprising. Lyft is obviously trying to keep more of the money that it thinks it is owed in its own pocket. But I think ultimately what the article is getting at is this fight that we keep having city by city, and I think it'll eventually be at a national level as to how we classify workers. If the driver is actually an employee of Lyft, then these charges are 100% legitimate. The money that the driver is earning is profit of the company, and therefore they should be taxed on it. Under Lyft's argument, they're saying that no, we serve as a marketplace. We are the ones who facilitate a connection between the driver and the passenger. The money that the passenger pays the driver is the driver's income, and then the driver will pay a fee to Lyft for the privilege of that connection, for the purpose and privilege of being on our platform. Obviously, the money that goes from the driver to Lyft is way less than the money that the passenger paid overall. So, I'm not a tax law expert. I'm not going to claim to be one, but what we're seeing here is a true battle of what type of worker is a gig worker. I would argue that the workers fall more in line with employees than they do independent contractors. Lyft and Uber and the various other companies do exert a lot of control over these workers. We see it in places like New York, where they're the lockouts. That's telling drivers when and where they can work. We're seeing it nationwide in terms of the restrictions that the companies place on drivers and where they go, how they can operate. It's not the free-for-all that they want to make people believe it is. It's a very controlled environment, and I would argue that the city of San Francisco is in the right, but we'll see how the courts play this out, because Lyft's been making the same argument that they've made for a long time, and California's done some wacky things in the past.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to be messy, but Torsten, I'll toss it over to you. I'm just curious your first instinct or first impressions of hearing that drivers are customers, not employees.
Yeah, I mean, first reaction, first instinct. Why did you bring this case now? 100 million. You just renewed your lease for your headquarters in San Francisco, and you downsized by 50% on square footage on your building. So I think this is a desperate scream to drum up some monies. They're cutting back everywhere. I think that's the bigger picture. And then how they frame it, like Brian said, how they want to frame it for the future, right? Because when they say that Lyft recognizes a revenue from rideshare as being comprised of fees paid to Lyft drivers, not charges paid by riders to drivers. That's that whole 70% BS lie that I talk about a lot in the channel on how they want to, sell, the take rate to the drivers. When they are taking $100 from the customer, and actually $30 ends up in your account, and then they still say at the week's end you're receiving 70% after all those external fees. That's the way they'd want to frame it for the drivers. 95% of the drivers understand it's nonsense. They look at it as the take rate. And I think San Francisco is going to look at it the same way. Really? You're bringing $100 million case against us. I think San Francisco is going to easily win this. But as cases sometimes go, you get some sort of out of court settlement. Maybe there's a couple of favors built in for Lyft. It might not be a monetary settlement. Maybe there are a couple of city favors built in at the end of the day. Lyft's going to get something out of this, but they'll definitely won't be getting $100 million out of this. That's the way. That's just my natural reaction to this crazy story.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And I was even thinking along the same lines. They'll get something out of it. I could see some sort of settlement. We've seen this before, where there's sort of like this big blow up, and then they say they're going to fight back, and there's sort of it settles out of court, or like you said, there's some sort of favors done. Because, Bryant, like you said, which is true, they're not employees, but they're definitely a lot closer to employees than customers, at least as far as I'm concerned. And, Torsten, also, like you said, with how they're using that middle ground to say, well, the driver, the rider isn't paying the driver. And, we kind of have this cloak and dagger in the middle here that we control, and you don't really know how much you're making. So they're trying to lean into all of it.
And another thing, Uber hasn't jumped into this discussion here. It seems to be just Lyft, right? And good luck. If I look at the history, lots of settlements. FTC is suing them. They've been taken for wage theft in New York. They're basically always just settling cents on the dollar. But they'll push the envelope legally, like let's see how much we can get away with. And then the suits come, the class action suits come. Then I think in 2024, it was just raining suits on both companies, and they settled for tiny little amounts. So at the end of the day, they're still making a boatload of money, regardless.
All right.
And they better be careful what they wish here. Just one more thing there, because
Sure.
oftentimes these cases have unintended outcomes. And if the courts were to come down and decide against Lyft and say, no, this model is all messed up, this is not how it's actually structured, your drivers are actually your employees, that would be a bombshell. And that could then unravel the business model for a lot of gig companies. So if they get the hint that this is not going their way, you could see them voluntarily dismissing this case or settling for a very small amount of money just to avoid some unintended consequence like that.
Right. Good point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good point. And, once again, just like we said with these other articles, I'm sure we're going to hear more about this, but we'll see. Everything seems to be messy. That seems to be the game plan, as you said, Torsten, and then the dust settles and they sort of come out on top. And I'm imagining
I think it would be a nice follow-up video or discussion, because at some point down the line, there are going to be some results in this case. We just saw Uber and then Instacart make a move on Seattle, suing them over those wrongful deactivations, and then the judges struck them down. So what I think, what you guys are always really, really good at, and I try to push the same thing in my channel, is when we have breaking news, right? That's sort of what they hear at first. But then there's the follow-up news, the results. So there's always like a second story that follows, maybe a month, maybe 6 months, maybe 12 months down the line. So I'm excited if we could even collab on part 2 on this one.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And you're right. And that's something that you hear the first bombshell, but it's sort of a trickle effect for a while until really things get settled one way or the other. And yeah, we'd love to have you back to say, we told you so, or, because it's, we've done this, we've all done this long enough to sort of know how things are going to play out. So it's always fun.
It is.
Well, that is the stories this week, gentlemen. Torsten, thank you so much. Before we head off to the weekend, I always like to let you guys, promote or give a shout out to whatever you want. So, Torsten, I'll let you go first. If you want to give a shout out to your channel, any events you have coming up, whatever you like.
So, firstly, to the Legal Rideshare team, keep on doing what you're doing. My subscribers appreciate you. I wish you and your families health, love, success, and a lot of laughter for 2025, as do I wish the same to all drivers. A big thing coming up in February would be February the 14th, the No Love Caravan. We're going to organize caravans in cities around the world. We did this very effectively in 2023 with 65 participating cities in 3 countries, and we got a lot of media exposure, which trickled back to the investors, and it was a good wake-up call for them. We're going to hit the repeat button in 2025, and we're going to push the big issues once again, and that is pay, the poor pay, the wrongful deactivations, and then just the lack of safety. So those 3 big topics, we need to keep them alive in 2025. And what a good way to start off with no love on Valentine's Day. And to all people, and in my channel, I'll give a brief little edit of this video. Make 100% sure you subscribe to the Legal Rideshare YouTube channel and to the podcast, because there's information that you're receiving. For example, the first topic we spoke about today, the IRS thing, that really, really affects all food delivery drivers and rideshare drivers. So stay tuned and participate. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Torsten. Really appreciate it. And as always, Brian, I'll give you the final say before we head off into the weekend.
Yeah, well, Torsten, I just want to say before we sign off, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate you. You are, just such a titan in this industry. You are, your channels has blown up over the years, and the information and support that you give to drivers is second to none. So we really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. Before we sign off, every week we like to remind drivers that if you're ever in an accident or injured on the job, please reach out to us. Our consultations are always free. We can help you recover things like the cost of medical treatment, wage loss, pain and suffering, any other damages that you sustain. Legal Rideshare is the first law firm in the U.S. who focuses on these Uber and Lyft accident and injury claims. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can visit us at LegalRideshare.com to find all of our contact information and even message us right there.
And, yesterday I ran a story on Billy the driver in Houston, Texas. I passed on your information, so you should be getting a call. That was a big story that involved his riders. And so my subscribers, the people watching my channel, I get a lot of email and text messages daily. If it has anything to do with accidents, anything to do with injuries, one name to call, legalrideshare.com. Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you guys very much. And as I like to say, that is the end of this week in Rideshare. See you next week.